Welcome back to another edition of Know the Foe. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, your Arkansas site in the Rivals Network. The Hogs are 7-3 after yet another tight win, this time knocking off LSU down in Death Valley in overtime. They'll be back on the road again this week, and boy, it doesn't get any easier with the trip to Alabama on the horizon. With that, it's time once again to go behind enemy lines for some insider perspective on the upcoming game. Mick Gillispie covers the Crimson Tide for BamaInsider.com, the Alabama Rivals site, and was kind enough to give us some time today. Mick, I appreciate it. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Andrew. And come behind enemy lines here. Let's talk a little football.
Well, let's jump right into it. You know, usually when Arkansas plays Alabama, it's the number one team in the country. This year, the Crimson Tide are all the way down at number 2. How would you assess Alabama's season up to this point?
Well, I think Nick Saban's done an excellent job of coaching these guys into thinking that they're winners and that they should win. I mean, you've seen it with Arkansas. Certain teams just figure out a way to win the close games, and Alabama's had to do that this year, which compared to 2020 is a big difference. You know, they've played some tight ones. They had to win down in Florida, had to hold on for a victory there. And then last home game against an SEC team was LSU. It was tight, but Alabama won. They've had their blowouts as well, but it hasn't been an easy season, even with the loss at Texas A&M. However, they're 9-1. They've had to deal with a lot of injuries. They're very thin at running back, but they're still dangerous.
You know, Alabama has had kind of an embarrassment of riches at the quarterback spot the last several years, going from Jalen Hurts to Tua to Mac Jones. Then there's been guys that have been there as backups and left and had success. You know, Tua's brother at Maryland, even Lane Hatcher at Arkansas State is doing well. How would you say Bryce Young, the current signal caller down there, stacks up to his predecessors?
Yeah, Jerome Ford at Cincinnati, another Alabama transfer, right? Look, I think that Bryce Young has done as good of a job as anyone could ask. He's the leader right now as far as Heisman Trophy odds go, and he deserves to be. He's just been so accurate. He's given Alabama leadership, although he's, you know, really a sophomore, right? I mean, he's been a guy that didn't start until this year. It looks like he's been a seasoned veteran, you know, this year under center. I think he's been fantastic. And Alabama does not have the explosive game breakers that they had a year ago. There's no Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Najee Harris is obviously in the NFL now, right? And then you got, Mac Jones, who might be the rookie of the year at quarterback, but it's been Bryce Young who's just been amazing for the Crimson Tide. The offensive line has had a lot of issues, and he just is able to move around in the pocket and make plays despite that. Alabama has a couple of game breakers. Keep an eye out for Jamison Williams, their running back. He transferred from Ohio State. So that give you an idea of how good the receivers are at Ohio State. But he's been great. He's been just an absolute super find for Nick Saban out of the transfer portal coming in. John Metchi's been very consistent. He's had some big games. I think Alabama's still waiting for someone to emerge in that number 3 wide receiver spot. But the running back position's been the one that's just been so tough for Alabama, and it's because of injuries. Their best running back isn't Brian Robinson, who's a COVID senior, right? He shouldn't even be in college right now, but because of that, he got the extra year and came back, and he's been a workhorse. But it was Chase McClellan out of Texas, who was one of those great recruits that Nick Saban got out of the Lone Star State. He was really, really good. And they lost him going into the Texas A&M game, and I think that really cost them in that one. Just kind of someone you could flip the ball to, make plays. Roydell Williams out for the season, needs knee surgery or got knee surgery. He was injured against New Mexico State. Alabama's down to 2 running backs. Trey Sanders, who was a 5-star that got hurt and then got in a car accident and really hasn't come back to form yet, or maybe has, and we haven't seen him a lot. Brian Robinson, we talked about before. And then they got a guy named Christian Leary, who was a receiver that now is playing running back, and Dowery Kennedy, who was a linebacker that's playing running back. Alabama very thin in that position.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that run game, and you hit it right there. But I was going to ask you for a little bit more on that wide receiver duo, Jamison Williams and John Metchi. What makes them such a good duo, and do they complement each other well, or what's kind of the scouting report on those guys?
Yeah, look, Jamison Williams is a deep threat. He's a speed guy. Apparently, he's the fastest or the second fastest guy that Alabama has on their roster. He has made a lot of explosive plays this year. A few drops, but besides that, he's been Alabama's most reliable target. And then John Metchi's more of, you'll see him across the middle. I don't want to say he's a possession receiver, but he makes big catches in traffic. He's a really strong guy. If you watched last year's SEC championship game, when Florida got the interception, he's the guy that came and forced that fumble that was kind of iconic in that game last year. He's a big physical guy and has good hands. So that's what I guess makes those two guys so valuable for Alabama. You got Williams as your deep threat, and then Metchi, who gets targeted a lot on third down and makes a lot of those catches.
Yeah, now flipping it over to the other side of the ball, it looks like Alabama is still Alabama with a dominant defense. Is it as good as what we're used to seeing, and what are the strengths of that unit?
Well, it's been kind of inconsistent this year. First off, they have improved throughout the season. I thought they would be a lot better this year because on paper, it just felt like this was going to be a very, very good defense. I thought maybe along the lines of what Georgia has. But that hasn't been the case. They lost Chris Allen, who's one of their speed rushers at the beginning of the season against Miami. And it's been hard for Alabama to kind of replace him. They've also dealt with other injuries as well. Drew Sanders, who can get after the quarterback, had surgery, and he's back now. I think it was like on his hand. And the defense really has been led by William Anderson Jr., who might be as good as Derek Thomas. A lot of people feel like, who's Alabama's all-time best pass rusher. I mean, he had 4 sacks against Mississippi State. He was a one-person wrecking ball that game, and he's got so many tackles for loss. I think he leads the SEC. I have to double check that, but he's as good as Alabama's ever had, and it's been his defense. And then the secondary's been inconsistent. They make a lot of big plays, and then all of a sudden there will be assignments missed, and you'll see guys running down the field wide open. So I'm curious to see how Alabama is able to continue to get better in that capacity in these tight games. Those big plays are huge, right? Henry To'o transferred from Tennessee at linebacker. He's been inconsistent. He's a really smart player. He can call the defense, but hasn't been as good as we thought. But he had a really good game last few games, actually. So maybe as some of the younger players get better, it'll make it easier on guys like To'o. But really, William Anderson Jr. for Alabama is the guy to keep an eye on, number 31. He's just an absolute wrecking ball. And some people feel like he should be a candidate for the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, was about Anderson specifically. I looked up, I'm pretty sure he leads the country in tackles for loss and sacks. Was that kind of production expected from him? And do you personally believe he belongs in that Heisman consideration?
Yeah, look, I think he's as good as it gets. And I mean, without him, Alabama, him and really Bryce Young, Alabama would be in deep trouble. But his ability to get after the quarterback is unprecedented. And sometimes Phil Mathis has started to come on late with the pass rush. That's helping out a lot. He needs a little bit of help just so that he doesn't get double teamed. And he still seems to get to the quarterback even when that's the scenario. But yeah, he's as good as advertised. I mean, he's just one of the best defensive players ever. And I mean, the crazy thing is that he's coming back next year. He's not even eligible for the draft yet.
That's kind of a scary thought for opposing offenses for at least one more year. So I'm also curious. You mentioned that the inconsistencies maybe in the secondary, and if you were an offensive coordinator and you had to try to game plan against this Alabama defense, is there anything you would specifically try to do, or any weaknesses you try to exploit, or how would you go about that?
That's a good question. Alabama's defense is good. They make adjustments. Tennessee came out with their offense and hit Alabama with some big plays. Alabama did a great job in that game on third down and time of possession, but Tennessee struck quick, and that was with tempo. And, it's something I know Arkansas is going to try to do. I guess just continue to get all those plays in and push Alabama. Alabama against the run's pretty solid, and Tennessee never really get a run established. So I'm guessing, that would be part of it right there. Would try to, just catch Alabama off balance a little bit. I thought Tennessee did a good job of that. Other than that, LSU had a couple sustained drives in the game that they played against Alabama, but only scored 14 points. Ole Miss had a decent second half against Alabama, but the game was over. Florida found something running and passing the ball, and their quarterback did a lot of running. So that's something that Arkansas probably would look to do too, with a quarterback that can run the ball, and it's hard to bring down.
And the last thing I got for you, I think Alabama opened as a 22.5-point favorite. I think it quickly dropped down to 20.5. You don't necessarily maybe have to make a prediction yourself, but how do you see this game playing out, and can Arkansas keep it close?
Yeah, I do a show on the college sportsbook gambling show. I talk about this all the time. Arkansas has been one of the toughest teams for me to handicap this year. I was kind of not a believer at the beginning of the year, and I kept losing, and then took them against Georgia, and you know how that turned out. But I did win with Arkansas last week when they played LSU. So I finally got off the snide with the Razorbacks. I think they're going to cover the 22 or 21 point spread. I just feel like for Alabama right now, they are explosive, but I just could see Arkansas trying to play a game where they're going to limit Alabama's possessions. They have a good defense. That Alabama had 6 rushing yards against LSU. I know a lot of that had to do with sacks in the game, but 22 seemed awful high for me. But I'm going to tell you right now, Alabama seems to find a way to cover these big spreads sometimes. I think, me personally, though, 22 just seemed like an awful lot. I was kind of surprised, to be honest with you, that the spread was that high. I probably would have had it around 16, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood.
Well, that's all I got for you, Mick. Yeah, I appreciate you taking some time to give us some insight on the Crimson Tide. And as a reminder, kickoff is scheduled for 2:30 on Saturday. The game will be on CBS. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you can always see these Know the Foe interviews, as well as press conferences, practice clips, recruiting videos, and much more. And as always, be sure to check out HawgBeat.com for our coverage of all things Arkansas.